thank everybody on behalf of the CEO of SARA and everybody that has been working hard to put this event together. And we're going to explore the value and the role of magazines in shaping the language industry. And joining me today is none other than Eri Arrieta, who's known for his passion, his energy, his dedication to the language industry's growth. And Eri, it's a pleasure to have you to talk about this particular topic at this very particular time as well.
Hani, thank you so much for the invitation. It is an honor. You and I both, how much work has been put behind the scenes, and I hope everyone can forgive me for the hiccup just right now with coming into the session. I promise you that there has been a lot of work that we've put behind to make sure that this conversation happens, or rather that this conversation is public and that this conversation is brought to everyone. So I appreciate everyone's patience, especially yours, Hani, because I know you've put a lot of work behind this.
Thank you. Everybody is even behind the scenes from SARA and Multilingual in collaboration and doing this translation space to talk about the magazines. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty, Eddie, can you tell us a little about yourself and even Multilingual for those audience who are unfamiliar with you or the multilingual media as well?
Absolutely, Hani. And the first thing I'd like to say is my name is Eddie Arrieta. I'm from Colombia, South America. Have a lovely family with 2 kids. I've been living in a city called Sincelejo, which is in the north coast of Colombia. I used to live in Medellin for about 10 years, where I ran my own entrepreneurial ventures, working in public relations and startups. I'm also an entrepreneur locally, where we co-own a coffee shop and restaurant called Maria Bonita. Here in the city of Sincelejo. And we love to get really involved locally. I particularly love to get involved with the community, to work with the city, to make this a better place to live for everyone. My family lives here. My wife's family also lives in the same hometown, and we've been living here since COVID. Multilingual media is the leading media organization in the language localization and globalization industry. Over 37 years of history, covering technical and also high-level topics in the industry. We have different properties or intellectual properties, IPs that we call, which include our physical magazine, but we also have different podcasts that we work on: Localization Today, Echoes of Meaning, the C-Suite Hot Seat, and Lang Talent, which works on language talent. Every month, we release an issue. We tend to work on an editorial schedule that allows us to cover specific topics. As an example, the August issue is going to be sports localization. And then we're going to have International Translation Month in September, and so on and so forth. Our website is also a great place where we receive news from the industry. We promote amazing events from our partners like SATA. And yeah, we are always looking to answer or find the answer to the question, what can multilingual do to help the industry? That's what we're always asking us, Hani. Thank you so much for giving me the
Why
opportunity.
we are here today, and I can attest to that wonderful collaboration, the conversation we've been having for the past several months about this event and other future events and collaborations between SARA and Multilingual. But today's conversation is about the role, the value, the challenges of content and magazines. And allow me to play the devil's advocate from the beginning, not for any other reason, but to pave the way for the depth of the conversation. So I want to ask the million-dollar question. In today's age, where we live in a digital age, where everybody gets access, immediate access with one click to content, news, media, and we find them in our social media feed and even our mailboxes as newsletters and everything. How are magazines relevant, and what is the value of magazines in this day and age?
And that is the $1 million question, Hani. And I think the first element of the conversation is that we shouldn't deny ourselves of the understanding of what the digital world has to offer us. We can never look to another side and then ignore where we are going as a humanity. It is part of the human nature to progress, to find different places and channels to communicate. With that said, I believe that one of the main components of this conversation is what is the essence of the content in terms of what it does to you as the speed of it increases or decreases. So I call printed books, I call newspapers, I call newsletters slow content. And we were talking as we were preparing to this conversation that probably we should talk about that. We should talk about what's the difference between slow content and fast content. But I believe that if you want to be a global company and if you want to communicate globally, you will need to communicate at different levels and different speeds. You're going to need to communicate through social media, which is really fast. And then social media itself has got elements to it that you have to consider. Some will say a post is very different to a reel. And a post is very different if it has an image than if it has a quote only. And if it shows a landscape, and how big is the description? The shorter it is, the faster it is to consume. Then we also think about other channels that today are generating a lot of revenue for different companies, like newsletters. And newsletters then are going to depend on the speed. Do you send this newsletter daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly? How often do you send it? And then you'll start seeing that even if companies don't print something, they will create ebooks. It's an ebook as fast as a social media post? Do you digest an ebook as fast as you digest a social media post? Probably not. When we're looking at the conversation of video versus audio, for example, that's another type of media, and they are consumed differently. Shorter videos are used today for microlearning, and then shorter audios are very rare because you will rather listen to something longer term, like you would do in the radio. Many radio stations are not dying, they are moving to the digital world. Why? Because there is still a demand for slower content. So what is then the answer to our magazine's relevant? Well, the answer is determined by the market. It's determined by those who still need slow content, for those that still read physical books. I was telling my friend Hani that my son loves physical books. We have a Kindle. He has an iPad. He can read it there, but he's tiring. It doesn't give him a sense of progress. It doesn't give him a sense. It's the serif type words is better. It's easier to read on a physical book. It is more practical to open a book than to open an app, and then when you don't have battery and all those conversations. But then once again, the relevance of the magazine is going to be determined by the market. And I shouldn't say the market. I'm saying the market because I believe there is business there, but I should say the audience. And then the audience being those that actually want to consume slower content. Is their slower content relevant? I believe so, because there are stories that it doesn't matter how many videos you make of it. If you don't read certain things, you won't be able to absorb those. And for some people, reading it is going to be better than others. But Hani, I think I'm jumping on some of the topics that we want to discuss.
This leads me to the readership and the audience's reception. And we use the keyword here that how do we digest content? So you mentioned that we cannot go with one extreme over the other. Can they coexist? And how do you, as multilingual, navigate that coexistence between the two fast and slow content?
I think what's important is that we don't demonize one over the other, and that we understand which portions of our audience wants to read what. Also, we've talked about repurposing. We've talked that the way for them to coexist is not to compete in I'm going to create slow content that gets printed, and I'm going to create fast content that gets printed, but rather what are the concepts that I want to work on What are the content? What's my content strategy? And how do I then take one specific idea and then repurpose it? This
Mm,
conversation that we're having right now, right? If we
mm,
go back, we will be able to get a transcript out of it. In fact, there is also a description and
mhm,
questions as we worked about it. We've had conversations before, which means that we could repurpose it and create slower content in the form of an outlet, an outsert that can be sent through a PDF or in the form of a magazine article, which we'll probably have at SATA magazine and multilingual magazine. And then we'll feature the questions of those that are with us. And then we make it slower, meaning someone will consume it next month, in 2 months, in this sense. A faster yet slower option is a blog post on the websites. So that's faster than what's going to come in the magazines, but it's another type of content from the same recording.
mm,
Then we're going to take the same recording and we're going to post it on YouTube. That is very different than taking the audio, which we can also do, and putting it on Spotify. We'll probably need to
mm.
do very little things to put it on Spotify, like a short description at the beginning that says, "This is a conversation with my friend Hani. I hope you enjoy it. I was late, but we had a great time." Right? So that is faster, but yet slower than the magazine. I'm sorry, it's faster than the magazine and it's faster than the blog post, yet it's
Mhm,
probably slower than a reel, right?
mhm,
We'll take this part of the conversation and we'll take 30 seconds of our conversation and
mhm,
say, look at this amazing question that my friend Hani asked me. We take 6 seconds and then we say, this was really insightful because of this. And here's where you can listen to the conversation much faster. So
mm,
I think that the way in which they coexist is in their understanding of their complementarity. How do
mm,
they complement an overall content strategy? How don't they complement? So how each of these channels complement each other in the repurposing strategy that we would have. If you had to say, okay, then what role does in that complementarity physical printing does is that it plays the role of the long-term slow
mm,
consumption relevance in someone's life because it sticks around. It moves
mhm.
around. My son reads the magazine. He sees it around. He just opens it and he says, "Oh, I didn't know this
Even
this
even
this
with
content
that,
is translated."
even with that is, and according to a lot of research that I've been reading is, and being from the 90s myself is, we're used to reading the magazines. We grew up around that, but at the same time, reading something electronically from a blog or from a social media, there are a lot of pop-up notifications and ads that can distract, where there is attention span that can be interrupted, where you're all over the place and you don't digest that slowly. In addition to that is the archiving value. Magazines play a role in having a timestamp in the history of a certain time or period where we cover that and build off of that. I can access SATA's archive and look at the previous 3 issues we've had. I can access multilingual over the 30 years we've had for those issues, and you can recall the lapses and milestones in our industry. So that's beautiful. Which takes me to the next question: is when we talked about strategy, we talked about a value and relevance of magazine, but content generation and content preparation and content publishing comes with a responsibility. And in a way or another, Multilingual Magazine and SATA play a role of covering, kind of. It's a contribution from our stakeholders, but at the same time, there is covering and there is issue articles and news articles at the same time. What is the responsibility and the role of the magazines? It's a huge responsibility on what stories to tell and what to cover, and how does that even reflect on the progress of the industry? So, what do you think?
No, thank you so much because this takes us back to also a big conversation happening around the industry, which is the conversation of long-term relevance and responsibility. This is not only a conversation for our magazines, but also a conversation for companies creating content around the world. So I'm listening to some LSPs from some LSPs that they say, "Oh, I've had clients that they decided they no longer want to do these specific translations. They are going to do it with a machine." And then the machine goes, does it, and it makes several mistakes. They don't even include people in the loop. And because they don't include humans in the loop, it's almost like they don't care. about what they are putting out there. And once it's out there, then it's really hard to change it. Now, when you're in the digital world on the website, you can change things on the website. Nobody's going to know. When you have a magazine that's printed, the responsibility is on what I'm putting there that's going to go in our physical repository. So we sent our magazine to over 58 universities around the world right now. And SATA is probably going to be available in all of the universities in the Middle East. Once it's written, it's there for the future. For us to recognize where was our thinking and how did that evolve over time. That talks specifically about human nature, but also about human evolution. Then it also has a very important aspect, which is the journalistic element of it. I love to think that our magazine gives us an opportunity to be observers of what's going on within our immediate context, our immediate background, and who is better able to identify and observe that background than those that live there. So there is a journalistic element and an observational element that gives me, as the reader, texture on what's really important when we're thinking about building long-term relationships. Because only like that we'll be able to understand, what is culturally relevant for each other, but also where the industry could be going. Now, in this process, what I've realized is that if I'm too slow, people are like, hey, you covered this article, but didn't you know about this and that? Then I'm like, oh my gosh, we really need to be on top of where technologies are going, of what people are thinking. And then we also have a huge responsibility for those in the industry. You will be surprised how many freelancers, translators, interpreters look at the magazine as the place where they can voice their concerns. So I believe that the responsibility is there in terms of content. It's there in terms of a strategy. It's there in terms of journalism, but it's also there in terms of social responsibility to address the issues that are very human to our industries.
And that's how we tell stories and amplify voices through those magazines. It's not just one side of an industry or one voice of leaders or entrepreneurs. It's actually a room for everybody to express that and have that space for them. And we'll talk about later on about how anybody individually that is joining us today wants to contribute or tell their stories or help shape the industry and help us reflect on the processes or the growth, or especially in the age of AI, as well as we reflect our day-to-day processes and navigating those technologies. But let's talk about journalism. What does quality journalism mean in that particular context of magazines and content generation for the purpose of reflection and social responsibility? And again, that archiving element where we tell the stories of the now for the future as well.
I will make a confession, and is that audience is the ultimate judge of your journalistic capabilities. And I say this because in the confession that I'm about to present, there is this one story. And probably this has happened in the past with other magazine creators and other journalists. But there is this one story where we covered an aspect of our industry's technology. And we went out to figure out who could help us work on this story. So someone did work on it, but yet there were some missing elements in that journalistic process. Now, when that happens, then there is a response by the audience. And then the audience becomes the observer of the observer. So the journalistic element of it has many judges, many eyes that are looking into, is this in reality what is happening to our industry? And in fact, I think it's a very healthy position, because the journalistic process is a process for everyone to be informed on where we are and how can I, from the individual but also institutional perspective, add to that vision that we are seeing reported over there. So someone has come to me and said, Eddie, I see that you've been talking about orchestration. I see that you've been talking about flow approaches, but you still talk about translation, and you don't say a lot about content, just content. Eddie, do you think you could work more or talk more about content? This comes from a reader. So the reader kind of like tells me a little bit about where should our journalistic focus be. And I think the curiosity is something that probably will drive our journalistic eye as well. And that's where magazines have a huge advantage, that we could do journalism that's fresh and that is not the daily one that usually it's very time consuming.
And this is a great segue to the challenges. And I believe one of the challenges we currently face in Sada magazine and perhaps even in multilingual magazine is that when there is a submission of an article and you want to help that individual to complement those journalistic gaps, to fill in, to tell that beautiful. Not everybody is perfect, nor everybody has all the abilities, but each of us is unique and has a way to tell that story, and they want to tell it. But there is fear from that challenge of perfection or that quality of the expectation. So, what are some of the challenges? And we can perhaps open with that challenge of that quality content that we can actually produce and submit for publication, and how can the magazines and the editorial teams help those authors rise above those challenges to tell those stories?
Yeah, I think there is an element of it that's conceptual and an element of it that's technical. The technical element of it is the project management of the stories. Usually you could have a story that's timeless. You can publish it anytime, in which case it'll take you forever. You will never write it. And there are some cases like that. And then you have other stories that have a time limit, meaning you have to write about those much quicker because, the translation month is in September. If you didn't write it for September, when you're going to have to wait another year, right? So that technical component of it is a huge challenge for writers because they are not able to do something that's very simple, which is you add a synthetic deadline, it's called. So this synthetic deadline is you say, I'm going to write this article by the 15th of July. Where is it going to be published? On my newsletter, on my website, on the SATA magazine, are going to pitch it to this magazine. So that's the first thing. It's one of the technical elements. The other technical challenge is my language proficiency might not be best to work on this. Well, now we have better tools to do that. Even if the language that we're writing for is not our first language, we can get help. Most of the magazines will have editors. So that is a huge help because you can then move this technical challenge to become an opportunity for yourself. So I think those are some of the technical elements that need to be taken care of. Now, in terms of the conceptual conversation, when you're looking at, should I what are the things that I could cover? What are the things that I should cover? I think the journalist has to be very curious. And the journalist or the writer has to be very open to being wrong. I see a lot of writers that they just have their own agenda and they don't want to look into what others think about that. So when they go in that direction, we're not even talking about the technical quality because it could be really well written, right? It could be done on time, but conceptually is of very low quality because it doesn't consider perspectives. So what is quality then becomes the question. And to me, quality has an existential component, meaning you cannot be a high quality content piece if you don't have integrity as a piece. And that means that piece has to have integrity. Some of the pieces that perhaps we've worked in the past, have to be tagged as sponsored or have to say, this reflects the thoughts of the writer because it's their integrity, not necessarily the integrity of the magazine. With that said, then, in the conversation of quality, writers have to think that their main responsibility is to bring integrity into the conversation. And once you bring integrity into the conversation, then you can have a high quality piece of content. And that high quality piece of content might have grammatical errors, might be a little off in terms of timing. But after that, then we can work on that to make it the piece that we need to work on. Now, I would say that, especially for print, one of the things that the writers have to think about is the images that we have. Those images are what drive the knowledge of the reader into the direction where we want them to go, right?
Mm.
And for us is the hardest thing to find is how can we add images that are powerful enough to guarantee that the message doesn't get diluted. And then you have
Mm.
to work on the timing. And then if you have integrity, then you'll realize that the better quality the image is, the better that the message of that article is going to be. I will say that images are not only visual. It is another part of that conversation that we had. How do we have fast and print? Well, I will put a few QR codes here and there that take to a video, that take
Mm.
to an audio. That would
Mm.
be really powerful. In fact, I don't know if you know this, honey, but in the United States, you can access some tax discounts as a magazine if you include complementary digital elements that add to the quality, technical quality, but also conceptual quality of the topics.
It complements. It's not just the text. It helps also the learners go through that journey of going from one page into another and looking through the images that can help and pave the way. I have satans and I have multilingual, and this is a masterpiece that takes, it's not easy to make this, and there's a lot of thought process behind it, and there is a lot of design works. And I echo with what you said about the design and difficulty to find images that tell that story that the author is trying to get. But to bring back all the points we mentioned in this discussion of this very specific point is for authors that think about walls and barriers ahead of them, and they have the ability to tell that story, ignore those walls, work on the craft, and you'll find editorial teams and editing teams and tools to help you. So the reasoning to stop or to reflect on this is coming from me before I wrote my first article on multilingual is to think about perfection and to think about whether it will be received well, to think about whether it's valuable, whether it's timely, all kinds of thoughts and ideas that can stand in a human beings from sharing that craft, from sharing that story. So this is a reassurance from editorial teams and strategies that it exists and there are people that can help you pave the way to tell that story and reflect, be it from individuals that are translators that reflect on the work or even industry leaders that should be featured as role models and their stories be told and featured in those magazines as well. So besides the design work and besides the planning and the strategy of it, are there any other challenges that face the team of multilingual in coming up with a quality issue as well? I keep going back
Yeah.
to the word quality because journalism is all about quality. And when you have good quality, the audience can decide whether what's working and not and reflect on that as well. So tell me more about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the elements that probably you are also experiencing in SATA, and that those that look into, like you're saying, this art of putting together these issues is fragmentation. So
Mm.
what I mean by fragmentation is that it's much easier, or it's more effective for humans to bundle. So when you bundle is, for example, if you have 20 tasks that each of them take 5 minutes, and they are very, very related into what they are, like responding to emails. If you do them at separate times, what you have there is something called context switching. Context
Okay.
switching has a cognitive cost to your brain, meaning, oh, I have to do this one little thing and then I switch to something else and switch and switch. That context switching is very expensive, and it's something that sometimes in the magazines you'll see, because we have what's called a queue issue. And it's
Mm.
okay, you can have different topics, but when you have one specific topic and one specialty, then you're able to put 2, 3 articles of the same specialty, and then the brain can absorb them in their variety. One article can be about technology, the other article could be about culture, the other article could be about timing, but then they are all around the same encompassing umbrella. The
Mm.
challenge there is, how do you get all these writers to align on a deadline for a specific month, for a
Ah,
specific print deadline, for a specific shipping. That is a
hmm,
huge challenge. So when you do not have a clear editorial schedule, you will have fragmentation through the entire year. And then it will look a little bit like a new word that I learned in the past month, which is hodgepodge.
oh, this,
Hodgepodge is this mix that you don't really know what it is. You don't know if this is a risotto. You don't know if this is a soup, a chicken soup. You don't know what this is. So
hmm,
you want to avoid the confusing the reader onto what is really the essence or nature of your magazine. Multilingual is a business magazine,
hmm,
yet we do cover a lot of social elements to that business. So it is very important for us to, as we are looking into quality, that we think about our editorial calendar as the way to deal with excessive fragmentation. I think fragmentation is good to an extent. You look at our issue and you'll see 2 3 gaming articles and then a few others. So we provide some context switching, but we make sure that there is some consolidation on the concepts.
hmm. And thinking about editorial content and partners and even the businesses as a business magazine where you feature tools and leaders and CEOs and companies and LSPs as well. We talked about this behind the scenes, and as we prepared in a wonderful conversation over coffee, is collaboration and the existence of collaboration. So our industry is built on a word that people think that is romanticizing the industry, which is bridges. We are the bridges. And I wholeheartedly believe, and I'm pretty sure you do the same, is that we are building bridges and we speak the same language, the language of empathy, connection, being understood, being heard, and cultural exchange. All of that in one place. Everybody, anywhere I go, wants to share, wants to help, wants to help. But are we doing enough? What's the state of collaboration? How can we take it to the next level?
And I love that comment. And I love the title, right? Like if translation is the bridge, our magazine's the map. I definitely believe that to be the case.
Mm,
As we look to kind of like show what are the players out there, when we show who the language service providers are, when we show who the translation management systems are, when we show who is working on large language models, now who is working in agents, which is the next conversation, then we show the possibilities, we show the landscape that's there, but without a human conversation, without human cooperation, none of what we're doing here would have been possible, right?
mm,
And there is so much that needs to be aligned for our conversation to happen. This is why I'm very grateful to be in this conversation. And I'm very grateful for your patience and the patience on the audience, because I do understand that
mm,
taking time of your day is not easy. It's not easy for anyone to do things on their own, let alone take time of your day to do things with someone else or with a different organization, which is going to require understanding values, aligning with principles. And we talked a little bit about this as well, how in politics you align wills, and then you also need to have transparency of the efforts. I think magazines highlight the transparency of the efforts. Who
mm,
is doing who thinks what? And if you disagree, well, come tell us. Let us know,
mm,
because we all want to progress. Sometimes the capitalistic view confuses certain people, and people think is that there's a zero-sum game where I win and everyone else loses, when it should be a win-win situation in most of these conversations. I think I have seen much more cooperation and
mm.
collaboration this year than I saw last year, because I
True.
see companies then realizing, we have to do these things together. We can do it separate. And then people would say, why would SATA and Multilingual, who have two magazines, why would they come together? They should compete, quote unquote. But the reality is that together, we go further than if we go alone and don't try to understand where we each other come from and what we can learn from SATA and
Mm,
what SATA can learn from Multilingual, and how can we each other provide this vision, this map of the industry, so that we can also start identifying the new bridges that are being formed along the way.
Absolutely. That multilingual, multinational, multicultural, and it circles back to a conversation. I saw a podcast for you and Robin Ayub. Hey, Robin, when you talked about us as individuals in the language industry, no matter what we do, even for those who came into the industry from other backgrounds, is are we talking enough and advocating enough about our industry? And what can we do to help pave that conversation? Our industry finds its way in other industries, and I can list all of them, and that we lose all time. So, how can we do that? And what do you think of the conversation that's going on now? And what will the future look like from your eyes within 5 years as roles for content and magazines paving the way for the language industry as well?
I think that's a great question. And when we look at what's going on in the industry, I believe there is a great transition into empowering those that care about language to understand what is it about language that they care about. And on that, what is it that they care about? Why is it important to us? What I have found and what we found, we have a new podcast called Echoes of Meaning, where we talked to translators, linguists, and interpreters about the reasons why they do what they do, the reasons why language is important to them. And what we've discovered in these conversations is that there is an entire element of culture that in most cases gets ignored. So the first part of the conversation is understanding that it's not just the plain I am translating, but it is what it is that I am translating, and why is this relevant to the fabric of society. And from what we are looking into, what's relevant about this is the content that it has, the context that it provides. So, to give you an example, yesterday I was talking with a buyer, someone who buys translation, and they have an internal localization system where they have a localization director, and everything else it's done through freelancers. So they use some of the TMSs, they use some of the TMs, they use some of these tools to do the job that they do. And what they found is that there is content that just does not need humans. It's content, for example, the legislation on traffic. The legislation on traffic is specific, right? You cannot copy paste the legislation of traffic from the US to Canada or to Australia, because even though it's the same language, it's a different it's a different law. So it's not even about language. So what is it about the translation? What it is the context, and it is the content. So I think within the next 5 years, and in this conversation of translation, I have to agree with a few CEOs that I've talked about that we are not talking enough about the nature of the content. I remember when I visited Riyadh last year, I was really surprised by the fact that we were talking about the word camel. How much richness is around one word? How easy is it for you to explain to me the feelings and the importance of the word camel, which also represents the animal, in the history and the fabric of the Arab society?
Yes. It holds a huge significance. So it goes beyond
We
just
will
the simple word.
we will have to read poems. We will have to listen to songs. We will have to ride the camel. We
Yes.
will have to look at the history of the word to just grasp the tip of the iceberg. This is one example. And I think within the next 5 years, what technology is going to do is that it's going to allow content to be much easily created, so that it would allow us to cover conversations where there isn't that much depth, right? Here is a law. This is what the law says.
Mm,
And we have to be very technical about that. And maybe law as a regulated industry requires certain parameters, but there is also very basic informations, confirmations, notifications. Those are going to be streamlined and used with machine translation very easily. Then you go to another place
mm,
where content becomes relevant, where companies that today were using machine translation are going to see that they are not as competitive because some
mm,
of their competitors that were not using any type of translation now can use machine translation because it's much cheaper than it used to be. And now they had some humans in the loop, but they are not as competitive as them. So they are going to
mm,
need to use more humans. So this decrease in budget consumption will go probably to content strategy. Then
mm,
content strategy is going to require context. And
mhm,
then translators, interpreters, linguists, culturalizers. I would say a great culturalizer needs to know the language, needs to know the history of the language, needs to know the culture around the language.
mm,
I believe that's where the jobs will be at. And I also believe that the companies that approach it this way will have a competitive advantage over
mm.
those that don't. So I think that there was a little a question there about literature, and we can go to the specific question in a little bit. But if we have two writers with the same abilities, writing abilities in one specific language,
Mm,
and one decides to write to translate their book with machine translation, given current capabilities, sure, in the future it'll be trained, but it's as limited as the human as the machine that as the information that fed the machine that's going to translate it, versus a writer who has another writer friend.
mm,
And maybe I, Eddie, wrote a book in English and then my
mm,
friend Hani is going to translate it into Arabic. What's
mm.
going to be a better translation right off the bat? The
The
machine
first,
translation version of the book or the translation of a writer friend, also a literature writer friend who knows the language, both languages, and it's able to then navigate those realities. I think we're talking here about competitive advantages. We're talking about economics. And I think paying attention to language is going to be a huge differentiator long term.
as we see it now, language is being considered as a strategic asset, being localization and other aspects of language as well. And
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about you during your visit to the translation forum last year about the efforts of preserving the culture. And we've seen the article that was published by Dr. Hela, as well as she talked about the observatory and how the efforts are being to preserve cultures and share them, multilingual, multicultural content with an effort and intention on asking the purposes of what and why to translate. That's how we develop that. A final question, because we're almost running out of time, and I do apologize. And this question is about for those who are with us today and for those who are going to watch the recording and they want to write. I'm going to tell them how to do it through SATA, and I'm going to ask Isra to put the information. But for multilingual, I have some audience here who speak Arabic and are capable of writing English and vice versa. How can they start, or what advice would you tell them, and how can they reach to multilingual as well to publish those art or apply for those, submit for
Mhm.
publication?
Thank you, Hani. And the first thing is I'm here for as long as you all need me.
I am
My
done.
time is yours.
Thank
And once again, it is a huge honor that members of the audience could consider writing for multilingual. I believe that writing is a great exercise to synthesize and consolidate information, consolidate ideas. And Hani, you will soon be a doctor, inshallah.
no,
And I believe that, inshallah, and I think that it's an honor, like I mentioned, to have members of the audience consider writing. I think as someone who writes yourself, and for me, it's been really helpful. Even when team member, someone in the team wrote to me this morning, say, "Hey Eddie, why are we taking this decision on being very strict with certain themes for certain months?" And I said, you are right. Maybe we can be a little flexible in some terms, but here is why this is important to me. And I was able to then consolidate my thoughts and put it into two pillars that allow me to think about why this was important. So that to me is the first thing. Writing is going to be a process of synthesis, and it's going to be a process of a structuring. So I think that's the first place to get started. I will get started with thinking about what are my areas of expertise. I will start thinking about what are the topics that I cover. No, I like language impact. So what is the impact language has in businesses? Oh, I want to talk about the intricacies of certain words like camel. Maybe there are hundreds, if not thousands, of words that we could go in depth. And for that, what's most important is the integrity of the content, meaning it comes from a place that knows. So having a clear outline of the topics that we could do, I think that's the first place to get started as a writer. I'd say the second place is to create synthetic deadlines. By when do I want to write this? Do I want to write this once a month? Once every quarter? Once every 6 months? Once a year? Right? And then with that, you'll say, okay, how long are these articles going to be? 300 to 500 words? That's usually what we put on the website. So if you have 500 to 300 words, you send them our way, and then we'll think about image, and then we publish it. But then we have shorter columns or articles. Those are 1,000 words long. And then after that, we have long form, 3,000 words. That's a big piece of work that takes more time. So depending on what do you feel like writing, then you can go in one direction or another. If you have the abilities, you could probably think about long form pieces and then break it down into smaller sections for digital. Maybe you want to put them on your blog, and then you'll say, as previously published in the SATA magazine, as previously published on the Multilingual magazine. So I'd say this is the case for those that are starting from zero. They've never thought about writing. Keep in mind that for multilingual, the ideal scenario is that you send your write-up and you say, could you consider this write-up? So we have multilingual.com/submit form, if I'm not mistaken. But if you go to the website, you'll see in our resources that you can very easily submit an article, or you can just write to editor@multilingual.com. Now, we have writers that have written in Arabic already, in the SATA magazine already. We are partners. So the first thing we need to do is figure out who in SATA could translate those articles into English, and then we can look for a form to include those in the Multilingual magazine. I do not worry much about editing because we have editors in the magazine. What we'll have to realize is what are the storytelling elements that perhaps we'll need to adjust to make sure that the stories are set in the same way. Maybe this is something that we can write about. How are articles written in Arabic versus in English so that the readers can start understanding some of the dynamics from our Arabic writing writers. So in the bottom line here being editor at multilingual.com.
So thank you very so much. On that note, I would like to also share that SATA has the same format, not on a website, but on an email where you can submit your articles, suggestions, reflections on the reading. As we said, we continue the dialogue through those reflections and lesson learned. So I'll ask our colleague Isra to put down the email of the magazine where you can submit those articles, and all is welcome. And you hear from us about the issues and the theme of each article as we publish them on a quarterly basis. Thank you very so much for this wonderful conversation. And it's time to take some questions. We have about 6 minutes, so hopefully we'll answer some of those questions. So I'm looking at the questions. So we've received a question from a concerned translator about the age of AI, and We talked about translating a novel from two different a friend who can translate it into another language, and that ability, that competence in that language. Uh, Perhaps we can touch on the AI element first on this age for translators and even for publishing. We can segue into publishing as well, and then we can jump into the second question.
I think the first thing to mention is that there is merit to the concerns,
Hmm.
and that it is important to recognize the feelings around the concern and also recognize the merit of the concern.
Hmm.
The reason why many are concerned is because we had been used to a system where everything needed human translation. And I believe it deviated some from the spirit of
Hmm.
translation. And sure, we can say there's a lot of people with the spirit of translation, but they are getting cut off. They don't have any projects. Yes, because what is happening is the conversation that we mentioned. There is content that before required humans that now artificial intelligence can do much more efficiently, because those that are asking for those translations don't necessarily care about the ultimate quality. They just care that it is done.
Hmm.
Before, there were companies that were only in Spanish. And today they say, oh, wow, look at me. I just pay $50 a month and I am in 100 languages. The question is, are they in 100 languages? So the answer to me is no, they are not in 100 languages. They have been machine translated into 100 languages, but they are not there because
Hmm.
they don't understand certain nuances. So the merit to the concern, the merit to the fear is that in fact, machines are doing translations that humans got used to doing. Translations that we were taught we will need to do. Now, what we have to think about is where is the value in translation? So the feeling of uneasiness comes from the fact that we think, but I love translation. I love culture, and you're telling me I'm no longer gonna look into it? I'm no longer gonna think about it? Then the merit to the concern needs to translate into action.
Hmm.
To me, then, what we need to think about as a translator is how then does artificial intelligence empower me to do the job that I do, to understand some of the things that I should help my clients understanding. And if you think about it, sure, many clients could use machine translation to even deal with their conversations in the Middle East. But I would not recommend a machine translation or a digital translator like a phone to have in depth conversations in Saudi Arabia. I don't think that would work. So
Yes.
I think as translators, what we have to start thinking about it is what are the things that the machine cannot do, where the most value is added, where is the contextual of the conversation, the culture of the conversation. Today I had a conversation with a famous TMS in the industry, and I won't say the name.
Hmm.
But they said, I told them, hey, I heard that TMSs are going to disappear. HubSpot is just going to have translators. So why do they need a TMS? He said, or they said, because it was a group of members from this company, they say, I agree about the concerns similar to the translators. But we believe that the heart of this conversation is translation memories,
Hmm.
meaning the knowledge around what it's being translated. Sure, the machine is going to be able to have a memory of the translations, but culture and language are dynamic. And the translator's job is to understand the cultural dynamics, the cultural nuances, and translate that
Hmm.
into the words that we want to, in a way, create. It's sure it's not transcreation because we want to say it's translation, but in many cases, a lot of this content has to be transcreated. And I'll give our colleague another piece of knowledge from this same conversation with the vendor, sorry, with the buyer. The buyer said there is a lot that we do with machines, but there is content that we cannot use machines for. Zero. It has to be translated by a human because it is content that it is called that has to be culturally aware, that has to use the culturally relevant languages. And right now, the machines are not fast enough to realize what's happening on the ground, to realize what's happening with the real people. And I think the translators are that bridge.
Hmm, hmm. I love the way you've described how translators are to be that bridge. In 1 minute, I received a great question. I have several other questions, but I really do apologize. We ran out of time.
No,
You were late. I
if it's
apologize.
okay with you, I will want to answer every single question.
Thank you.
I was late and I'm really disappointed on myself and I want to
No
make
problem.
up for it.
No problem at all. So, can you give an example of a magazine that has really shaped how translators work or think? Now, this question, mind you, is from a reader's perspective, but it's good to have examples. You can even mention an issue or an article that Multilingual has, because you've done a lot of diverse themed issues about translators and translation as well.
Yeah, I think to me one of the issues that's really powerful for us is the September issue. So
Mm,
last year we did something called Hidden Gems. And the
mm,
idea was to understand that perhaps translators, interpreters, and linguists are not the only ones
mm,
that make the industry move. I am not a translator. I am not an interpreter. I am not a linguist. I would
mm,
ask the community to say, do I have an impact in the industry? I hope the answer is yes, to a certain extent. So that issue helped the industry, helped the translators understand that we are part of a community, that
mm,
is not them isolated, that they have people in marketing that want to work with them, that we have people in our mailing room in multilingual that allow for the magazines to get to those translators. And I believe when I talk to several other translators, their concept changed and
mm.
they might have ruptured a paradigm where translation was the center of everything, where it is part of an ecosystem. So I am very proud of that issue, and it will happen again this year in September.
And just to for the audience's sake, it's called Hidden Gems, and it was September's issue of 2024. So we'll be sure to share that link as well on LinkedIn or our feed and to continue that conversation. And I would like to thank everybody who has joined us, everybody who's asked a question, who has engaged, and I recommend taking this conversation further to LinkedIn, to Twitter or X now being called, and other platforms and our emails. Eddie, how can we reach you and how can our audience reach you as well?
Thank you. I'm very easy to connect with. You can find me on LinkedIn as Eddie Arrieta, and with the multilingual website, you will also see my contact information there. My email is Eddie, EDDIE, at multilingual.com. Like I said, very easy to reach. We are building bridges. We are deeply committed to understanding the impact that language has, the impact that a language has not only for business but also for the conservation of culture. We are big admirers of what's happening in Saudi Arabia, leading the conversation, and we look forward to continue covering what is happening. So if you are listening to this and you want to get in contact to find ways to amplify that message, Eddie at multilingual.com, and LinkedIn, I'm there available.
Thank you so much, Eri. And on behalf of SATA and everyone in the team, we thank you for joining us. My name is Hani Ratebi, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with every one of you. I hope you have a good night if you are in Saudi Arabia or in that region, and have a good rest of your day if you're in the West or anywhere in the world. We wish you good health. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.